Hey everyone, today we're making a vegetarian quiche with fresh asparagus and ricotta cheese. And so just so you know, a quiche is just an egg tart basically. And this one's light, airy, delicious. It pairs so wonderfully with a SIP certified Brut Rose. I think you're gonna love it. Okay, so for this recipe, I'm using a 9-inch pie plate. I'm using a deep dish pie plate though. So you have a few options here. When you buy your pie crust at the store, I'm using a pre-made pie crust. You can actually just roll out one pie crust. It's gonna be super thin though if you roll it out for a deep dish pie plate. Or you can do what I'm gonna do. I'm just gonna stack both of them that are in the package and roll those out so I get a nice flaky buttery crust with that quiche. Super easy, that's what I recommend, but you do you. And so why do they call it like pie crust on the package, right? It's not pie crust until it's baked. It's just dough, right? You make a pie dough, then you bake it, and then you have pie crust. It's like calling it toast before it's actually toasted. What's that all about? Okay, so here's the thing about pie dough, and I'm gonna say pie dough instead of pie crust. So it will actually keep for about a year and 6 months past the best by date. So if you have some in the refrigerator and you're unsure if you can actually still use it, as long as there's no visible signs of spoilage and it's been kept in the refrigerator in the sealed package that it comes in, it's actually safe to eat up to a year and a half after the best by date. So just so you know. And also, if you love these kind of tips, be sure to stay to the end of the video. I have more storage tips for all the ingredients in this recipe. Okay, so I took both of the pie doughs, whatever the plural doughs is. I took both of those and I rolled those out, stacked them on top of each other and rolled them out. And then what I'm gonna do is transfer them to the pie plate. So what I like to do is take that pie dough, fold it in half, and then fold it in half again. This makes it really easy to transfer the dough without it tearing. You can also put it on top of the rolling pin. I always screw that up, so this is the way that I do it. Then we're gonna take that pie dough, put it into the pie plate, and then press it down along the edges and especially in the crease of that pie plate. Just press it down and shape that pie. The part that's hanging over the edge, we're gonna take that pie dough and just roll it under to form our crust. So this is where you shape your pie dough, and this is the part that I'm terrible at, so please do a better job than me. As you can see, I'm not very good at this. But take that pie dough, fold it under for the whole rim of the pie plate. And then once you have that set, you wanna put the pie dough in the pie plate in the refrigerator for at least an hour before you bake it. This will help that pie dough keep its shape. I have a question for you though. Have you actually made a quiche before? I feel like it's one of those things that people are a little scared to make, but it's actually not that bad. It's pretty much just pie crust and boom, eggs, and they bake it. It's super easy to make. So that's what we're gonna get to next. We're actually gonna make that custard for the quiche. So you wanna take a large mixing bowl, and we're gonna take our eggs, we're gonna crack them and add them to the mixing bowl and whisk that all together. So here's a little trick. If you've never actually cracked an egg with one hand, here's how you do it. So grab the egg with your one hand, and then when you crack it on the bowl, you wanna actually take your index fingers kind of pushing up through the crack of the egg while you use the rest of your hand to pull that shell apart. That's the easiest way to just kind of crack all of the eggs that you're gonna use for this recipe. Okay, so we're gonna add our eggs, our cracked eggs, to the mixing bowl and whisk them together. Now, be sure to stay to the end. Like I said, I have some storage tips and other tricks for the ingredients that you're using in this recipe. Then we're gonna add our milk. And our salt and our pepper. And we're gonna mix that all together. Then we're gonna take our ricotta cheese and fold that in. And as I mentioned, this recipe pairs just wonderfully with a SIP certified Brut Rose. Now, you might wonder what Brut means. So it's a little confusing because when it comes to sparkling wines and when it comes to regular wines, Brut and dry and sweet and all that is a little bit different. So dry wines are typically not sweet wines, but in the sparkling wine arena, Brut is the dry part, and the sweeter wines in sparkling wines are actually the dry wines. It's confusing as hell. Don't worry, you're not drunk. I'm gonna explain more of it at the end of this video. Okay, so we have our custard ready. That's the egg and ricotta mixture. And we have our pie dough in the pie plate that's been chilled. That's all good to go. We're ready to assemble our quiche. So the next thing you want to do is you want to turn your oven up to 425 degrees and bring that up. And we're going to actually assemble the quiche now. Okay, so we're going to add in our asparagus and our gruyere along with that custard mixture. So one thing about the asparagus that's really important. So you should check out my video on how to cut asparagus. A lot of people just break them in half, and it's actually a really wasteful way to prep asparagus. Check out my video on how to cut asparagus. It shows you the best way to do it, the easiest way to do it, and how you can do it and save a lot of asparagus in the meantime. And hey, save you a few pennies while you're at it. So we're gonna just take that asparagus, that chopped asparagus, that shredded gruyere, and we're just gonna add it in layers to our pie plate, to the crust. And then we're gonna take that custard that we made and pour the custard over the top of the asparagus and the gruyere. Now, you wanna make sure that you just coat evenly the whole area of the inside of that pie dough. And then take the pie plate, slam it on the counter a few times, tap it a few times, make sure that egg mixture really gets into all the nooks and crannies. Not only did I mention that this recipe goes with a Brut Rose, but I mentioned that it was a SIP certified Brut Rose. So what is SIP certification? Well, SIP certification is for wineries and vineyards that really farm with concerns around the people and the planet. So it's looking at how they can farm sustainably, how they treat their farm workers, what they do in the field. For example, in sustainable wineries, you might see owl boxes out in the field, and they use those birds of prey to keep the other pests in order. So check out sipcertified.org. You can learn all the information and all the delicious wines that you can find there. And this quiche goes wonderfully with it. I also want to know, how important is it for you that things are sustainable? The products that you buy, is it important that they're green? Let me know. Okay, so getting back to our recipe, you've poured that custard into the pie plate. Now you want to take the pie plate and put it on a baking sheet. And then we're going to take crust guards and put that around the actual rim of the pie plate. The reason for that is the crust guards actually make it so that way that edge doesn't burn while the rest of the quiche is cooking. So it gives it a nice even bake. We're gonna bake it at 425 degrees for about 45 minutes. The thing that's key with a quiche is that it should have a little bit of a jiggle in the middle when it's done. So it should be set, but jiggle just a little bit. That's gonna mean it's really nice and light and airy and not super dense. Okay, so let's talk about the sparkling wine sweetness issue for just a little bit. As I mentioned, when it comes to sparkling wines, Brut are the drier wines, and the drier wines, referred to as dry or sometimes sec, which is French for dry, is the sweeter wine. It's really confusing because when it comes to wines in general, usually dry means not sweet, right? So what happens with winemaking is they press out the juice from the grapes, and then that yeast during fermentation eats up all of the sugars, or at least most of the sugars. So it eats up those sugars. How much sugar the winemaker lets the yeast eat determines how the sweetness is of that wine. So if all of the sugar is consumed from the yeast, which turns it into alcohol, then that wine is going to be on the dry side. If some of that sugar is left over, then that's going to be a little bit sweeter, and that term is residual sugar when it comes to winemaking. So that's where you typically kind of think about when it comes to dry wines. But when it comes to sparkling wines, it's a little bit different. With sparkling wines, you refer to those wines when they're dry, they're referred to as brut. Now you should really check out my video on the 7 different types of champagne sweetness because it explains all of this in much more detail. But the sweeter wines are called dry or extra dry or sec or extra sec, which again is just French for dry. So it's really kind of confusing when you're buying sparkling wines compared to regular wines when it comes to the word dry. So just be sure to be mindful of that when you're looking for a wine. But this one is dry. This is a Brut Rose. It's SIP certified, it's tasty, and it goes wonderfully with this quiche. Okay, so our quiche is finally done. It's been baking for about 40 minutes, has a slight little jiggle in the center. And the thing that you wanna do is you wanna let that quiche rest for about 10 minutes after you remove it from the oven. That's gonna allow those eggs to set fully. That jiggle will stop a little bit, and it'll just have a nice, delicious, light, airy, tasty ricotta and asparagus quiche that you're just gonna love. Once again, goes with this amazing Brut Rose that's SIP certified. So as I promised, here's some storage tips and some other information about the ingredients used in this recipe. First off, eggs. So eggs, if you're unsure if the eggs are fresh, you can do a quick little test. You can actually take a tall glass of water and drop that egg carefully in the tall glass of water. If it sinks towards the bottom, even if it kind of floats on its edge a little bit, that egg is probably good to go. If the egg floats towards the top, just toss it in the compost pile. You probably don't want to eat that egg. Now, if you've seen on egg cartons, the dates can be really confusing, right? A lot of times they use Julian dates. It's not always clear as to when the best by date is for eggs. So here's my suggestion. After you purchase your eggs, you probably want to eat them within 2 months. I wouldn't actually let them go longer than 2 months. Just use that water test to make sure they're safe to go. And lastly, asparagus. So as I mentioned earlier, you don't want to just bend the asparagus and see where it breaks to trim up asparagus. It's a huge waste of asparagus. Americans waste 40% of the food that we grow in this country, and I'm gonna say it kind of pisses me off. So don't do that. You can actually trim your asparagus and prep it and save a lot of it by doing a few things. One, you can take a vegetable peeler to it and just peel off the bottom part. That'll remove those woodier ends and you get a lot of asparagus. You don't waste a lot by breaking it in half. Or you can just trim off the ends just a little bit near where the white part is, and those spears will be nice and tender and delicious. It's the easiest way to get the most asparagus for your money. Now, when you're storing asparagus, here's a little tip. Trim off those ends again. Just trim off like a 1/4 inch, put them in a mason jar, a glass jar with some water, and store them like cut flowers in the refrigerator. Stored this way, asparagus will actually last up to like weeks longer than you're probably used to. It's a great way to keep your asparagus fresh, longer, and save yourself money and fight food waste. Okay, so I hope you liked this recipe. I hope you found the storage chips helpful. I think you will love this delicious, tasty quiche. Be sure to check out sipcertified.org. You can find this Brut Rose and other great wineries and vineyards to like purchase sustainable green wine from. Let me know what you think. If you like this video, hey, give me a thumbs up. If there's something that you want to see, just drop a comment down below. And please subscribe. I release new videos every single week.